knowledge of history, what is your opinion on sexism?
Well, I think any form of discrimination is wrong. I think that women should have the right to do whatever they are capable of doing.
Do you believe sexism is still an ongoing problem? If so, elaborate.
Yes, sexism is an ongoing problem. I know that several studies have proven that even in women's pay, women are generally paid less than men are for doing the very same job. I think that maybe one day it's going to change. It needs to change now, but for those that are in charge, unfortunately now most of them are men. So maybe that'll change in the future.
Over the years, in what ways has sexism changed?
Well, I think it has diminished some. I think the voices of women are a lot stronger now than they used to be, and I think the fact that women can have proven that they're just as capable, I think has narrowed the gap between us.
Would there ever be a solution to sexism?
I would hope so. I think that it can change, but it's going to take a concerted effort from everyone. I have a daughter myself, and I would like for her to be able to achieve whatever she wants to, regardless of her sex.
How have the women's stereotypes changed over time?
Well, I think a big part of it has to do with I don't want this to sound bad, but the views of women in the Western Hemisphere. Women are a lot more outspoken, a lot more demanding, and I think that there are certain areas of the world where things have not changed, and in fact, in some cases, they have regressed. I think that hopefully one day we'll come to a better understanding.
Okay, so what was your experience of being in the music industry, or mariachi as you were in? Was it good or bad?
It was pretty good for the most part up until I got into the higher ranks and the competition season. That's when it started getting bad.
Did you ever feel restricted with what you could or couldn't do?
Yes, I felt like my instructor and my fellow peers thought I wasn't capable of doing what everyone else could do.
What could you have done to make your voice more heard?
I probably could have spoken to I spoke to the instructor multiple times, but nothing was done. So honestly, I don't think there was much else I could do, because I would volunteer, I would raise my hand, I would practice, I would talk to him, and nothing would be done. So I don't think there'd be a lot more that I could do unless I change schools or something.
How do you think the specific area can improve to make things better?
I think it should be more open to anybody who wants to try and get ahead, and not just have typical people in mind or a typical mold for someone to fit.
What can women do to be more heard by others?
Not be scared to speak out and get turned down. I mean, I got turned down, but keep pushing until you get the ending you want, the results you want.
Hello, nice to meet you.
I'm Sam.
As a starter, as a student, how do you feel about the music industry today?
As a student, how do I feel? I feel that the music industry has become something that has been very monumentally influential in the lives of students, as we all like to listen to music during class, during lunch, after school, before school. Like it's just part of the new and upcoming generation, like it's never been a part of anything before. And I think music surrounds us even when we don't realize it is. And so it's important that we make sure that everyone is represented as much as possible, since it does have such an influence on the lives of the new student generation.
Okay. Do you think that women need to be more represented in this community?
I do, with my whole heart. It is not just a study, but it is actual statistic that for every 47 men in the music industry, there is one woman. And I can't even describe what an injustice that is, because part of the reason is that women are being more pushed and pushed and pushed to be part of the more flashy side of the music industry. So you see more women artists these days who are taking the stage, who are on red carpets, who are a part of the celebrity culture. Like 99.8% are male. It is a male-run industry, despite the fact that, you know, we do have artists like Billie Eilish, like Demi Lovato, like Taylor Swift, like Lana Del Rey, you know, that are at the forefront of pop right now. They aren't the ones who control the industry. It's the ones who write and produce the songs behind those, and those are almost entirely made up of males. So I do wholeheartedly think that in the next decade and beyond, we need to see a huge shift in female representation in the industry.
What do you think women can do to be more heard?
As a writer and a producer myself, there is just a sense of entitlement to someone's music, and that's very understandable that when you create something, you want it to be specifically heard by you. But what happens when artists have that mindset that one's music should belong only to them, and I don't mean legally, I mean in a creative sense, that's when the systemic sexism happens, is when males don't reach out to hire more women, to give women more opportunities. It even goes back to the education level. When you look at the amount of music majors that are women, it's like depressingly low. So I think it's more of the men's job to make sure that they are not being as discriminatory towards women, because I think that's where the flaw is happening, because when we don't include women, then it's just a chain, and it's a completely male-run industry from then on when you make that mistake of not including the other gender.
Can you give us some examples of where you've seen this in today's society?
There are examples of systemic sexism in the music industry pretty much everywhere. I know this is a very talked about issue, and I hate to bring this up again because it just recently came to light. The Scooter Braun versus Taylor Swift, I guess you could call it a scandal, but it was bullying is what it was. Because Scooter Braun is arguably the most powerful and the most rich producer and manager that there is in the music world today, and has been for the last couple of decades. But what happens is he uses his financial power to be able to charm whoever he wants into whatever he wants. And he used Taylor Swift as his figurehead for about a decade until he realized that pop culture was moving on. And so it became very obvious that he was using her, a female artist, just as someone that could represent his brand and someone that he can make money off of. And that just shows how quickly men in the music industry are to just totally disregard women at all costs for their own gain. And that's where the shift needs to happen, is when people need to realize that music is about the art and not about the pay.
What do you think can be done to make it fair for everyone, in your opinion?
In my opinion, there is plethora of changes that need to happen, and it all comes down back to mindset. Because when, like I said, when you have the mindset that your art needs to belong to you creatively and to no one else, that is when men take over, and that is when music becomes completely male driven. What needs to happen is for us to shift our mindset into thinking, oh, how can we be inclusive in this? Not, oh, this is mine. I can't talk about it too much right now, but my next music project, my next release that I'm working on and have been for a very long time, includes all women other than myself, because it's a shift that needs to happen, and it all starts with mindset of wanting to include others, rather than just sailing and letting yourself only be limited to the people who you typically want, which in the music industry case is almost always males. So it all starts with the mindset of wanting to include everyone and make sure that all sides are represented in the art.
Do you think there's a wage gap between males and females?
I think in the music world, it is purely based upon how famous you are. The more famous you are, the more money you're going to make. We were talking about that, and especially when you're talking about in the pop world, I mean, Madonna's probably going to make just as much money as some, Adam Levine. In fact, she probably makes more money than he does. So in that case, I would say the wage gap, if there is a wage gap, has more to do with notoriety than it does with gender. But again, like when you're talking about instrumental music, there are more men who are famous for their instrument. And that goes back to, is that an interest thing or is that truly a gender bias? And, you know, that's hard to say.
Do you believe the way a woman looks has to do with career and fame?
Absolutely. I think it has most everything to do with it. I think that, it's like I said in my first answer, is that I think talent is important, because if you don't have talent, you're not as likely to do well. But you can have a little bit of talent, but if you have the right looks, and let's just be fair. I mean, as a woman, if you're willing to be a little bit nasty, you can be very famous for doing things like, I mean, Miley Cyrus is a prime example of that. You know, she started off as Miss Clean Cut, and then she pulled her little stunt, and, you know, but she's very famous, but, you know, she has used her body and her sexuality to help get her there. So
Studies show that there's a 30% wage gap between males and females. Do you think this is something that needs to be fixed?
I think my feelings are, you know, you get paid the same amount for the same amount of work. I mean, if my male counterpart and I are doing the same job and we're doing the same work, then absolutely we should get paid the same. I think in the music world, it goes back to how famous you are, though. And so I don't know that that somebody's going to get paid less just because they're a woman. I think what it is it's notoriety again in how famous you are, and you have to pay your dues in music. You know, same thing I would say in probably acting, you know, like in the movies and stuff. You kind of have to pay your dues and work your way into a position where you can basically barter your salary. And, you know, I was talking with Mr. Rogers, and even in, like, say, opera or Broadway style, like musicals and stuff, they usually have a set price for leads, a set price for your supporting actors, and then there's another price for just your chorus background people. But if you've got a very famous person coming in who will be attracting more people because of who they are, those people can usually negotiate a price that's a little bit more than what they're offering everybody else. And again, that just kind of goes back to notoriety and famousness. So, you know, my feelings are, as far as wage gap goes, that no matter who it is, if they're doing the same work as someone else, they should absolutely get paid the same. But when you're talking about performance-based jobs, notoriety goes a long way.
So the first question is, do you think women are expected to look and sound a certain way in the music industry?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. There's, you know, when you take a look at TV or you take a look at videos, you take a look at anybody that's winning any kind of Grammys or anything at all, there really is a certain look that goes along with what is considered marketability of an artist when it comes to females and males as well, but mostly females. You know, there's more of a demand on how they look, you know, more than on their talent, I think. You know, I don't know if there's just, you know, because in the music industry, it's not like it would. I think it would be easier in the workplace to do it, to put in, you know, certain regulations and certain procedures to follow to create equality. But I think in the entertainment industry, that's still it's too biased. I think because there's more autonomy with producers and people that work in that they don't have to follow the rules because there's such an emphasis on profit, on how they can profit from an artist. And if that means that looks are gonna hinder profits or keep profits from happening, then it's just something that they're not going to do. I just think it's impossible in the music industry to regulate or to control or to make some procedures to make it fair for women. I can answer that from my perspective. But let me tell you what my perspective is. Since I don't keep up with popular music, and since it really doesn't appeal to me, there's really no need for me to look at who's winning an award, because chances are I never heard of the artist or probably won't like the music. But I just think if men are winning more than women, maybe, do you think it would have something to do with record sales more than anything else? How much money they're generating? That's what I would think. That's what it would be based on. Oh yeah, I do, because there's some very talented people, and especially since with YouTube and the internet and what's available, you can come across very talented groups being fronted by women. But it just depends on they would really have to stand out. Something would have to make them really stand out. Especially if they don't have looks. Especially if they don't have the money to back it up, then it would have the talent would just have to be so advanced that for them to be noticed. But I think getting their foot in the door comes from how they look.
So, what do you think can be done for women to be heard?
I think what women are doing right now, a lot of times in those underappreciated areas, like say as the drummer of a band, is marketing themselves as exactly that, as something special, because they are a good drummer, but they're a woman. That happens a lot. Like, I'm trying to think of an example, but there just aren't that many right now. Otherwise, I don't have any idea, honestly. I think it's a lot deeper than just the music industry. I think it's a cultural issue as well, of seeing women as having certain roles versus men. I was talking to my wife about it, and she witnesses it and sees it as well. She's also a music professor, and she definitely sees different standards. Not that they're necessarily, I don't think it's nearly as bad as it used to be, but I don't know. The second question is kind of hard to answer, actually.
Okay, so the third question is, why do you think there are beauty standards and expectations for female artists?
Again, I think that's a cultural problem. So I teach music history, and I can tell you that in the pop industry, as long as music was just on the radio, it wasn't as big of a deal. There were a lot of singers and whatnot that were both male and female that just weren't very attractive by today's standards, at least, or by what you might think of as attractive. But they were super famous because it was all about how they sounded on the radio. And then when MTV came out in the 70s and started having music videos, it completely changed. It's also changed in opera, whereas opera was known for kind of heavier men and women. It was famous for that. Once that started changing with things like MTV, it started changing on the opera stage as well. And now men are expected to have sculpted bodies and things like that, just like women are expected to have certain beauty standards. But I do think it's a lot harsher on women than it is on men, by far. Yeah. So I was saying, I think it definitely has an influence on the younger generation. With each generation, we see sexuality playing out in a different way, in a more overt way. But I don't think it's always, and I asked my wife for confirmation of this, because as a man, me speaking about women's beauty standards isn't the greatest. So I asked my wife for confirmation on this, but she agrees at least to some degree. Some women now, not all women, but some women like Shakira or like Miley Cyrus are using those beauty standards and that objectivity that's been cast on them for a long time on purpose in order to establish feminism, using their sexuality and their attractiveness and whatnot as a way of championing feminism, saying this is my body and I get to use it how I want to, which was a rebellion by Miley Cyrus, like against her father, Billy Ray Cyrus, for example. So I think it does have a heavy influence on the younger generation, but not necessarily in the way that we might expect.
So that was our documentary. Thank you so much for watching.
And just to further clarify, the main goal of our documentary was to further emphasize the problem within the music industry that we chose, and that's how female are not represented well within it.
And of course, there's still some people out there who have different opinions, as some of our interviewees had stated before. There are some women that are getting paid more than men in the music industry, but that's only based off of success. But there still are women out there who are getting paid less than men for doing the same job.
And us as a whole group, we decided to focus on this particular issue because it's still shown in today's award shows such as the Grammys or the Oscars. It's always seen, and it's such a big area, like a big issue, that it needs to be clarified even more. So thank you again for watching.
Thanks.